Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us and taking your lunchtime out today. So this is a webinar today run by Women in Nuclear UK Central Branch. So just a bit of an introduction to Women in Nuclear UK. So we are a part of the 30 international branches under the umbrella of Women in Nuclear Global. So Women in Nuclear UK was formed in 2014 with the mission to address the industry's gender balance and improve the representation of women in leadership, engage with industry, government and public on nuclear issues and support the industry with tools and information. So Women in Nuclear UK have three primary aims, which revolve around attraction, so encouraging more women to choose a career in the nuclear sector, retention, supporting women already in industry and helping their career progression, and lastly dialogue, so at all levels around the benefits of nuclear industry. So today forms one of the webinars that Women in Nuclear UK Central Branch have been running over this period while we're all working at home. And if you've agreed to be part of the Women in Nuclear newsletter, we'll add you to the distribution list so that you'll hear about future events with Women in Nuclear. So without further ado, we're really pleased to welcome Speak Out Revolution to come and run this webinar today. Really exciting initiative, and I'll let Marie talk to and tell you all about that today. So I'll pass over to Marie Hemingway.
Perfect, thanks Rachel. I'll start to share my screen. Just to reiterate, thank you so much for joining us on your lunchtime to hear about the silent killer of truly diverse and inclusive workplaces. Really excited to be talking to Women in Nuclear UK, and I'll speak a little bit more to that in just a second. So what I was hoping to cover in today's talk, just as a quick overview, is a little bit of an introduction to myself, to give you some background to why I'm interested in speaking to Women in Nuclear and the work that I'm currently doing that I think is very applicable to people on this call and also the people that you work with in your everyday jobs. A little bit of background to Speak Out Revolution and how we came about. And then I'd really like to focus the majority of the talk on the problem that we want to solve, that we see in workplaces, impacting the creation of truly diverse and inclusive workplaces, which is a real focus for businesses right now. I'll then touch on Speak Out Revolution, who we are and what we're looking to do, and how we want to be a small part of the solution. And I think we agreed, Rach, that we'd take questions at the end. If people have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you really want to ask, just unmute and shout out. I'm totally happy with that. That's absolutely fine. But I think Rachel's going to pick them up toward the end, and we can go through them and have a bit of back and forth, time permitting. So I hope that sounds good to everyone. I'm going to just do a little bit of overview of myself. So I saw this on a talk once, essentially someone's career in images, and I thought I really enjoyed it and I remembered a lot about them. So I thought I would take a similar approach. So starting top left, moving left to right and down. My academic background is in physics. I'm a physicist. So I know we have some physicists on the call. Congratulations, great subject, the best of all subjects. So I graduated with a physics degree. During my time at university, I got involved with the university's air squadron and was really influenced by my time as a reservist in the RAF, and was really committed to the mission. Unfortunately, the RAF don't recruit physicists, which I think is a mistake on their part. So I ended up working for a company which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, the Atomic Weapons Establishment. So I joined as an operational analyst, and my work was really focused on computational modelling of weapon effects, and then also experimentation to continually improve the models for predictive purposes. While I was at the company, I also studied part-time at Cranfield University for a master's in engineering. So that was specifically focused on military electronic systems engineering. And my thesis was around understanding connector responses to fast rise time, short duration EM pulses. I then had the opportunity to join a startup company. So it's a North American software company focused on asset management, so helping businesses think about how they best invest across their asset base. So a combination of strategy, finance, and engineering. So I joined the very early team as we were growing business in Europe as a consultant, worked predominantly in the gas industry, just by chance, and met a few women there and ended up joining the board for the Women's Infrastructure Network to address some of the gender imbalance that we could see within that industry. So I became a board member for the Women's Infrastructure Network. And then a significant moment in my career, which people don't talk about, is I found that I was having a child. And so that was a big difference in terms of career path for me, pre-child and post-child. I then joined Jacobs, the engineering firm, more focused on strategic consulting, looking at business transformation. And then over, I would say, the last 6 months, working with Jacobs and seeing some of the challenges that we faced in the infrastructure sector, decided to focus full-time on the not-for-profit Speak Out Revolution, which is what I want to talk to everyone about today. So one thing that I really wanted to pull out of this and entire background, or this kind of decade career history, is that there has been a very consistent theme that I have noticed in my working life. And that theme is that there are just no women in STEM or STEM fields, or fields related to engineering, physics. And I've always found this incredibly fascinating. Like, I've really enjoyed the technical work that I've done over the years, but actually I see that the biggest challenge or the biggest mystery that I've found really interesting to pursue and understand and solve is why we see so few women in these fields and in these fields and companies and roles that I have really enjoyed over the last 10 years. And so what I wanted to do with people on this call is test out a poll to understand what drivers people on this call have heard discussed for the underrepresentation of women in STEM. And I guess I want to prime people a little bit. What I'll do is I'm just going to jump out of these slides and pull up a Slido and give people an opportunity to log into Slido, just scanning the QR code on their screen, or to go to slido.com and type in the event number that you can see on your screen. And as people do that, I guess I just want to talk about, some of the reasons, often the reasons that I hear that we see an underrepresentation of women in STEM often focus on women themselves being the problem. So it's often that women don't apply for promotions, or women don't ask for the right amount of pay, or women lack confidence for leadership roles. And actually, one of the reasons or justifications for an underrepresentation of women in STEM that I have never heard in my entire working career is that women are harassed and bullied out of our organizations. And actually, when I look at my professional network and my connections, increasingly, these are the reasons that people are changing roles or leaving their organizations. And so what I want to do is jump into the poll and understand how representative my view is of whether that is correct, and ask people to vote on the reasons that they've heard that people have that women are underrepresented in STEM roles. Fantastic. So I'll leave that open and I'll just comment on what I'm seeing. Underrepresentation of women studying STEM subjects. This is always a big one that I hear, of why we can't recruit more women. I don't know that this particular reason can justify why we fail to retain women in STEM subjects, but really interesting to see that. And then just scrolling down, a really low percentage of people hearing that women are harassed and bullied out of STEM. So that's fairly representative of what I've heard and seen on the topic. So glad to see that people on the call have a similar observation. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and jump back to the slides. And then move on to, just before we get into the talk, to tell you something that I believe. So I really believe that we can't create truly diverse and inclusive workplaces in the sense that we're talking about them without addressing unreported and unresolved harassment and bullying. Definitely across my professional network, increasingly, I'm seeing women leaving their roles and fields because of unresolved harassment and bullying. And yet this is something that we never talk about. I join women's networks frequently and the discussion is always around how women can access toolkits to improve the way that they work within their organizations. And I often see organizations running initiatives to help recruit and retain women, but I never hear anyone talking proactively about harassment and bullying. And actually what I want to do in this talk is demonstrate that unless we start talking about these things, we can never hope to achieve truly diverse and inclusive workplaces. When we look at harassment, particularly discriminatory harassment, we're essentially forcing out individuals that have protected characteristics. So people that deviate from our standard expectation or stereotypical expectation of what a scientist or technologist or engineer is. So I just want to briefly touch on the background to Speak Out Revolution. And actually, this is a really interesting exercise that I would encourage everyone on the call to do in slow time. So what I essentially thought the background to establishing Speak Out Revolution, the not-for-profit, was instances that had happened over the last 6 months. But actually, as I started to reflect on what really drove the establishment of the not-for-profit, I could see that this stems back over my entire career. And similar to people that experience harassment and bullying, these instances start in such a minor way and escalate so slowly over time that you don't realize a problem exists until the problem really exists and you know about it. And only with hindsight can you see that actually there were symptoms very early on of the behaviors that you've been subjected to. So just to give you a quick walkthrough of kind of what has led to the establishment of Speak Out Revolution. In my very early career working in STEM, what I hadn't anticipated was in the organization that I worked, there was a very strong culture of normalized sexism, from openly being called a bitch in meetings for asking people to get back on topic, to being referred to as the tea lady, to frequently being asked if I was part of the administrative support, even though I was presenting at conferences. There was very much this normalized environment of these behaviors being acceptable and routinely unchallenged by people in the workplace. And then as I continued to work in STEM, I was one of my connections reached out to me and essentially described being sexually harassed, reporting it to their organization, and no action being taken. I very strongly remember a workshop that I joined looking at barriers to women in science, technology, engineering, and maths. And a large portion of the people in that workshop talked about challenges they'd faced with harassment and bullying, in which they had been moved teams as the solution and the perpetrators not re-educated or addressed. And at the time I rationalized this as this is out of the ordinary, this is quite odd. I remember attending an event, a women's networking event, in which the major topic of conversation was women routinely being what I would now refer to as sexually assaulted in the workplace without any follow-up or penalization for the perpetrators. And then I recall kind of mid-career that I personally had observed an individual whose behaviours were, in my view, unacceptable, and they were impacting myself and also other members of the team and group that I worked in. And I remember raising a concern to leadership. And I recall it quite well, because I thought it was quite odd at the time that the initial reaction was that I must have made a mistake, and the mistake was on my part, and perhaps I was oversensitive to the particular situation, which I find really funny now because I am the least likely person to be offended by anything anybody says ever. And then as I look towards, as we're coming closer towards present day, really this started to snowball. So I started to have connection after connection. And I should mention at this point that actually lots of these people that I reference are people that work in the nuclear sector, that have a background in engineering or physics. So very much people that could be present on this call. So 2-3 people contacting me talking about their experiences and how they've been inappropriately handled and how they had really severe challenges that meant that they felt their only option was to leave their role or leave STEM altogether. And so I started to look more seriously at work that we could do with the Women's Infrastructure Network and raise in a board meeting that, you know, we can't continue to just run events. Actually, we need to provide women with toolkits on how to appropriately address these situations, because actually what women don't need is workshops on how to increase their confidence. What they need is to stop being harassed and bullied so they can do their jobs effectively. And so I started to look more closely at this. And it eventually led to a little bit of an investigation of why do we keep seeing this problem? Why does this persist? This makes no sense. And so this is what I've been focused on for the last, I would say, 4 months. And eventually I decided that I wanted to refocus my efforts full-time on solving this problem with the not-for-profit Speak Out revolution. So I see that we have lots of challenges in just in the world. We have lots of challenges that STEM backgrounds and professions can help solve. And actually my biggest concern is not that we can't solve them, it's that we're not going to have a diverse enough workforce to bring about the most efficient solutions to those problems. And so what I wanted to do was just stop for a moment, and now that we know that we're really good at the poll, is to do another poll of people on this call to see whether or not you know of someone in your professional network that has experienced harassment and bullying in the workplace. So I'm going to jump back to the poll and move on to question 2. So I'd be really grateful if people could take their votes. I just want to say that this poll is anonymous. I don't know who is voting here, so please don't feel that anyone will be singled out for their response. And just to note that I have this option of I'm not sure, because one of the trends that we're seeing when we speak to people around harassment and bullying is often, if you haven't experienced it, people don't understand what it means or what it is or what it looks like, which is one of the things that we want to address through some of the work that we're doing with Speak Out Revolution. Okay, brilliant. So, brilliant, but not great. So I can see that, okay, so the majority of people on this call know someone in their professional networks that's experienced harassment and bullying. And yet, when we talk about what drives women out of STEM, and men as well, which I'll come on to toward the end of this talk, 70% of people know people that have experienced this, and it's a real challenge to maintain your job and actually have to tolerate these types of behaviours in the workplace. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for voting in that poll. I'm going to close it now. So I'll jump back to these slides, and then I want to briefly talk about the problem that we want to solve. So this visual is available on our social media channels, so you're welcome to look over this in slow time. But this was essentially the output of an anonymous survey that I was involved in. And I think there's a couple of key statistics that I'd like to pull out. So I should say that this is very much an organisation that anybody on this call could work for. So of people that experienced harassment, bullying, or victimisation, for every 100 people, only 3 people will see a satisfactory solution to their harassment and bullying experience. So there's a 3% resolution rate, which is fascinatingly low, in my opinion. 66% of people will choose to not report, and there's a whole ream of reasons why people don't report. One of them, I suspect, is that we're seeing it's twice as likely that your experience becomes worse than is fully resolved by reporting to your organisation, which is incredibly concerning. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight on this slide was from the work that we've been doing, we're seeing two kind of rough classifications or groups of people, or camps, so to speak. So in the first camp, there are people that have not experienced harassment and bullying, that understand their company probably have a policy and a process associated with it, and generally feel quite confident that if they had a problem, they would speak to their manager or someone in HR, and that problem would be resolved and they'd be good to carry on with their job. And then the second group of people in which they have experienced harassment and bullying and they've had to try and solve the problem, and their experience is vastly different to their expectations before they have been harassed and bullied. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges that we face when we're doing our work with Speak Out Revolution. How do we help the people that don't recognise that if they are harassed and bullied, it's going to be a really, it's a difficult problem for them to solve, and actually their expectations are probably not aligned to reality. So what I wanted to do before we moved on to the next slide is, this is the last poll question that I'll ask, is to understand whether people on this call, if they feel comfortable sharing, and again, this is an anonymous poll, whether you've personally experienced harassment and bullying in the workplace. So I'm going to go ahead and make that question live. And just to reiterate, this is completely anonymous. I don't know who is responding here. And again, there's the option of I'm not sure, because often people don't realise they're being harassed and bullied until they find themselves crying at their desk one day, and they're able to reflect over a period of time and say, actually, yes, these behaviours align with what is not acceptable in the workplace, and that's defined as bullying and harassment. Fantastic. Okay, really interesting. So we've got 22 votes in there. So that's interesting. So again, the majority of people on this call have experienced harassment and bullying in the workplace, and yet again, this is not a key topic of conversation when we're thinking about what drives people out of the STEM field. So that's really interesting to understand, and actually, a lot of people not quite sure. 1 in 5 people not quite sure. Which is interesting. Brilliant, thank you. So I'll just jump back to the slides and move on to talk about this really low resolution rate, 3% satisfactory resolution rate for people that experience harassment and bullying. And so, in my career, I've worked a lot with organisations that are looking at transforming how they operate to be more efficient. And so I spent a lot of time with policies and processes. And actually, in my mind, if I was working with an organisation and we were seeing a 3% positive outcome on any process we'd set up, I'd be very quickly going back to the drawing board on why that was not working and how we could improve it. And so one of the things that I really wanted to pull out here was to just briefly pull out one of the barriers that we are hearing from people that experience harassment and bullying and try to resolve it in the workplace. And it's number 3, and I've alluded to this earlier. So this visual is available again on our social media, so please feel free to take a look over this in slow time. So number 3 is around personal awareness and their expectations of resolution in the workplace. And this is just to reiterate the point that what we're hearing from victim survivors is that before they were harassed and bullied, their expectation was that if they had a problem, they would go to their workplace and it would be sorted. And what they actually experienced was something vastly different. And I thought it was worth highlighting on this call for people that fall into the no category of, please don't expect that if you have a problem, it will be resolved. Because the reality is, or what the experiment tells us, is that really isn't the case. And this is part of the problem that we want to solve with Speak Up Revolution. So what we've been looking at from workshops, from journey mappings with people that have had these experiences, to anonymous surveys, to one-to-one interviews, is what drives this continued problem? Why is it that for the last decade, I keep hearing the same stories over and over and over again? And I'm sure there are many more reasons than the ones that I've described here, but these are the ones that really stand out to me. So the first, and for me, the most important one is that all of the infrastructure, so that's policies, processes, people that are in place within organizations right now to support the resolution of harassment and bullying experiences when they're brought to the attention of the organization, act to silence the victims through one means or another. And there's lots of different, for me, examples of how this happens. The methods of reporting, I think, is a really good one. It's very difficult. Reporting is really hard. Firstly, the person has to recognize that they are being harassed and bullied. And often the way in which people are educated on this is substandard or not to the point where they understand that they're being harassed and bullied. So by the time that they do come to report, it must have escalated to a point where actually they're seeing mental or physical impacts of this behavior. And so they're in a really vulnerable position. Often when people need to report to their organization formally, it takes something from maybe a problem that you just want to hush up and go away and be solved to an official thing that has to go through a long and arduous process in which you have to do lots of different things. And so actually it's very burdensome for an individual to report and essentially fight for an appropriate resolution. And often the resolution doesn't solve the problem. So this challenging process means that for people that want to take this forward, it's very difficult. And often there's a little bit of a cost-benefit analysis of, is it worth my effort to do this? And so I see kind of two extremes of the spectrum of people that recognize it probably won't have a successful outcome, so they don't report, and they either tolerate the behavior at detriment to their mental and physical health, or they leave. And often people that do report and get to a certain part of that process find that they have to leave anyway. So secondly, and this is really disappointing, the root cause is often not addressed. So one thing that I'm hearing is for people that experience harassment and bullying, when they raise that as a concern, they are made to feel that they are the problem. And actually, the root cause of the problem, which is the person that is behaving in an inappropriate way, they are often not re-educated or negatively impacted. They're often promoted, actually, which is really interesting and something that I'd like to gather more data on. So what you find is that where victims do find a solution, it's because they've been moved to teams, which reinforces this perception that they're the problem, and the perpetrator goes unimpacted and allowed to continue in their behaviors with the next person, or they leave the company. And again, neither of those things addresses the root cause. So it's left to perpetuate. And then more, I think at a strategic level for me, is what I'm seeing from the organizational side of things is that harassment and bullying is is seen as all of the processes and policies in place are really driven by compliance. How do we tick the boxes that mean that we are doing what we need to do as a business to be aligned with ACAS or to be aligned with something else? But it's not really outcomes driven. Like, if you should think about it, if the outcome, the desired outcome for this particular problem should be that 100% of people that experience harassment and bullying are able to report and then rapidly and sensitively come to a solution in which they are satisfied. And we're seeing 3%. So if this was more outcomes driven, perhaps we would see a much better experience for people that are subjected to this behaviour. But what we see is complaints are handled individually, and bigger picture trends are not really understood or looked at. So what we're seeing is that people that we're talking to that have experienced this behaviour are aware that the person that has harassed and bullied them has done it to 1, 2, 3 of the people within that organisation. But the organisation is looking at this on an individual level and ticking the boxes. And I think what encapsulates all of these points for me is that there's no transparency beyond the organisation of these challenges. And if we look at, for example, a gender pay gap reporting that's come in, transparency in that space is driving change, is making people look more seriously at the mechanisms which lead to the gender pay gap. And so at Speak Out Revolution, what we want to look at doing is, how do we increase transparency of this problem to drive positive change? And so just briefly want to touch on what our plans are with Speak Out Revolution. So we are a not-for-profit. We have a vision of a world where every person is empowered to speak out and to see a positive solution to their problem rather than be silenced. And really, our mission is to cancel this culture of silence on harassment and bullying in workplaces across the UK. So looking at the visual, and this is super high level, we see this problem where harassment and bullying exists. And I think that problem will always exist where you bring people together that have different backgrounds and think different behaviours are acceptable. But the problem that we see and want to solve is this silencing of the victims of this behaviour to their detriment. And so what we want to do is essentially capture data from those people, so empower them to speak out. We want to launch a nationwide survey, the Speak Out survey, to capture lived experiences. And then we want to collate that information and present it open source, independently in the Speak Out dashboard, to look at key trends within sectors and organisations around metrics of interest to this particular problem. So this might be number of reports that exist within an organisation. It might be the average time to solution. It might be how happy the victim of harassment and bullying was with the solution itself, to pull out key trends, and then to use that data to have an evidence base, and use that data to drive positive change and increase transparency in this space. So we're also going to have so this is the core objective, but what we're also going to do is use that information to drive different activities and programs of work to essentially equip and empower existing victims of harassment and bullying and potential future victims of harassment and bullying, so we can try to drive positive change in this space. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop overview, but I did have a question for people on this call. I'd be really interested to understand what questions people might have about Speak Out Revolution on this course. It's really going to help when we develop our FAQ for our website, just to see what people's thoughts are and what might not be clear to them. So I'm wondering, Rachel, if there are any questions around that, we could spend a couple of minutes on those now.
Sure. So I see there's a question that's come in. Do you think one of the key issues is not enough training / examples to show everyone, both men and women, of what bullying and harassment looks like? It's often stereotypically shown as something physical, which is often microaggressions, withholding opportunities and mental verbal actions.
Yes.
I wonder what your thoughts on that were.
So whoever said this, please be involved in a future workshop with us. So I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. One of the key things that have come out of consistently our workshops is people didn't know what harassment and bullying looked like for them. And you can imagine that if you are a 20-year-old white female, your harassment or bullying is going to look very different to if you're a 50-year-old gay black man. And reading a generic overview of what constitutes bullying or harassment on a piece of paper, it often doesn't translate into your real life experience. And one of the things that we are currently exploring, and I'd love whoever's asked that question, I'd love their insights on it if they want to contact me outside this session. One of the things that we're exploring is a podcast series of people that have experienced this before, talking about what harassment and bullying look like for them. And we want to shine a light on the different communities or protected characteristics almost of people, to try and highlight, you know, if you're gay or you're transgender, you know, this was the experience of someone that's gone through this before. So, you know, heads up to anyone else that might identify as similar. Watch out for these types of things, because they start very minor, but they escalate quite quickly. And we want to empower you and equip you with that foresight and knowledge so that you can take action. So completely agree. And yes, we want to look at that. And I would absolutely love whoever asked that question to get in touch and help if you would be interested. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Marie. And there's quite a few other people agreeing with that point, that they often have come across microaggressions, which they haven't necessarily thought they were being bullied, harassed, until that's escalated, and you look back on it and think, yes, that
hindsight's wonderful, but you've paid, you know, hindsight's wonderful, but the price that you pay for your mental health, and this is one thing. Don't underestimate the impact that low-level harassment can have over a period of time, because it's significant. And you know, this is one of the things that we want to help people avoid, essentially.
Someone else. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Rach.
Someone else is saying that by law, psychological violence is also considered workplace violence. So it would often come out as psychological violence, rather than, some people might just think of it as physical violence or harassment.
And actually, it's an interesting point. One of the things that I've definitely picked up when you talk about harassment and bullying, the words themselves, like, I think we need to change the language, because the words themselves have stereotypical associations, as people are alluding to, and actually, even people that have experienced harassment and bullying, that could sit down with a list of behaviours and tick the boxes, so that, you know, they know, oh yes, I've experienced these behaviours and that's classed as harassment and bullying, still themselves won't associate that they've been harassed and bullied. So I think that we need to do something in this space of moving away from what people think harassment and bullying is, to actually what it isn't, you know, and it's definitely not just physical. The psychological component is, as you've said, really bad. Really bad. Yeah. There's another question. Would you know of any businesses or organisations who could be good examples that have balanced systems in place to deal with bullying, harassment cases, and that could help us as a process is being reviewed? So I've had this question before, and the answer is no, I don't. And that's because there's no independent regulator for this. And so essentially organizations govern themselves, and they do what they want, and they don't share that information because they're not incentivized to do so. What I'm hoping we can do with the Speak Out dashboard is say things like, the engineering sector as a whole, this is what on average you might expect if you have a harassment and bullying complaint. Let's look at the organization that does this the best in terms of KPIs. And then you can start to say things like, okay, so this organization does this much better. Let's understand why, and let's share that learning with the other organizations that fall within that same sector. Or, maybe there's a sector that does all of this super well. What are they doing that other people could also pick up? And so we definitely want to create this community of practice almost across organizations, or be the independent body that can link people up where they want to improve and help them understand that they need to improve as well. So can't answer the question right now. Ask me the question again in about 2 months, or visit the Speak Out dashboard, and you should be able to see who's doing well, assuming that we haven't had some like a legal injunction to take their organisation off our website, which is a reality. So I'll move on, Rich, because I think I've got 2 more slides, but definitely happy to take questions. I think we'll have time for some more questions, and happy for people to reach out to me after the session and I can answer. So this slide, carrying on with the idea that we want to use real lived experiences and real learnings from people that have gone through this processes to help others. And one of the things when I was talking to Women in Nuclear UK about this talk was, what if people join this call and they're being harassed and bullied? Can you redirect them to information that might be helpful to them? And what I wanted to do was, instead of giving the generic response, there's loads of information if you Google online, driven from the legal perspective of this is how you do this is how you pursue this. What I wanted to do, and I ran a workshop in order to do it, was to provide people with advice that has come from people that has experienced harassment and bullying across multiple sectors and with multiple different backgrounds. And actually the themes that came out of that workshop were, there were some pretty strong themes, and that's what I wanted to briefly talk through today. So if you are currently experiencing harassment and bullying in your workplace, this is advice from people that have gone through it before. One is to explore informal methods of reporting, ideally anonymously. So the general consensus was that formal reporting did not help their situation. And actually, if you can have a private conversation or get someone else to have a private conversation with someone in a senior position to outline the problem, it's much more effective in bringing about a resolution than formal reporting. 2 was to gain, and again, this speaks to points that people have made on this call, gain a clear understanding of what harassment and bullying looks like and the impact on an individual. So people typically underestimated the mental and physical impact of experiencing harassment and bullying. And so actually they said it was really empowering for them to understand exactly what it looked like and understand how it impacted people so that they could recognize it in themselves. 3 was to understand your legal rights for your particular situation. The law is so complex, I think, around harassment and bullying and protected characteristics and discriminatory behaviours. The paths and the options that you have through a formal route differ quite significantly. And so people found it helpful to understand that very early on. 4 was gather evidence. And this is from 2 different perspectives. One is often what we hear when people raise grievances is you didn't have enough evidence to prove what you are saying, which is a topic of a whole other conversation. One thing that you have to do is gather detailed evidence on the different things that you've experienced over a period of time to demonstrate a pattern and to demonstrate the behaviours. And there are certain pieces of information that you need to gather. There's a really interesting TED talk on this, which I'll provide Rachel with the link after, that tells you exactly what you need to capture. But really the driver for people that have experienced this before saying it was gathering evidence for them was very therapeutic and empowering, because often what they found was when they were raising complaints, they were repeatedly being dismissed or, told they were being oversensitive. And actually gathering the evidence helped them put together a timeline of events where they could look back and say, I'm not being oversensitive. This has happened X number of times in this many ways, and here are the people that witnessed it. So they found it very therapeutic for themselves, even if they weren't intending to use that to report. And this is something that I would really encourage everyone to do if you're going through this, which was, we had so many Post-it notes in our workshop about this. Confide in your support network, and whether that be professional or personal. People often keep these things to themselves, and actually there's studies that show if you share the burden of the problem with someone else, or you confide in someone else, actually that has a positive impact on your mental health, which is one of the things that takes a massive toll when you're going through an experience like this. So please reach out and speak to someone. Happy to chat to me. More than happy to hear about harassment and bullying. It's my entire life now. And then number 6, which is, it's kind of disappointing, but I think it's worth sharing, that people that have gone through this and formally reported to their HR department have said that they wished they knew at the start that HR were not there to protect them. They were there to protect the company. And actually, they've said if they would have known that, they would have done certain things differently. And so I think that's we can't extend this to all organizations, but I think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind if you are thinking about formal reporting. And then I've been talking for a long time, and I can see that we're coming to a close. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening. And I hope that what we've talked about today, you can see that if we really want to create diverse and inclusive workplaces, we can't do that without talking about unreported and unresolved harassment and bullying, specifically when we're thinking about discriminatory harassment, where people that have protected characteristics have been targeted, the people that bring diversity to our organizations. And so what I wanted to do was just very quickly go over 3 things that I think you can do to help. And that is reach out. So I've mentioned this before. Proactively ask your staff, your colleagues, your friends about their experiences. It's something that I consistently do now in every conversation that I have. And actually, I would say in 90% of cases, so in more instances than not, someone shares a story with me about something that's happened that is completely unacceptable in my view. But we know that this helps people that have gone through this experience in terms of their mental health. So even if you haven't, reach out, understand, educate yourself. 2 is shout out. So please help us raise awareness by pledging your support and sharing our page on social media. So Speak Out Revolution, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're in the very early stages of what we want to do, but we're going to be trying to address some of these challenges through the work that we're doing. So if you know someone that might be interested, or you're interested yourself, please help us by spreading the word. And then 3 is speak out. What bullying looks like. Make sure it's included in the D&I discussion. So many organizations are running events around diversity and inclusion, and one thing they are not talking about is harassment and bullying. And I see this, particularly in my professional network, as one of the primary reason why good people have been driven out of STEM or their organizations or the field as a whole. And actually this is shocking, because the nature of the problem means that they can't talk about that. They're not allowed to say that's the reason why. And so this problem goes silent. And actually we need to proactively talk about it when we're talking about D&I, in my view. And then work in your organization to create a speak out culture. So recognize that the survey and the stats that I talked through earlier, that might apply within your organization. And I'd be asking you to think to yourself, if you were a victim of this behavior, would you want your journey to look like that? And what can you do to impact change? So I will say thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and I'll leave you with what will you do to drive positive change in this space. So I hope that's been useful. Thank you so much for listening. And happy to take any questions in the 3 minutes that we have left.
Thanks a lot, Marie, for that. There are a few more questions, but I suggest probably in the interest of time, I've made some notes, and we could perhaps release some of those questions out to the attendees afterwards.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Marie, again for a brilliant and really interesting talk. I think by the level of engagement on the questions, I think that has really sparked people's thoughts. So thank you very much, Marie, and thanks everybody for joining today.
Thanks so much for having me, and have a great day, everyone. Hopefully see you on our LinkedIn page soon.